true and faithful relation of what passed for many years between Dr. John Dee and some spirits. So let's show you the holy table as illustration this time around. This is a facsimile edition, so that should be fine. And the reason he thinks, and yet he, no ordinary man, neither. Ex Mysterio vini a dilecta Deo ex cujus mysterio quotidii sacramentum sacrosancti sanguinis Domini confictor, and etc. But I shall have the more proper place for the full examination of these things in one of the two treatises before mentioned. So in his copy it should be Vitis and Vin. Okay. It cannot be denied, but this whole business of witches, what through ignorance, what through malice, is very liable to many mistakes and diverse impostures, and it were to be wished that in all such trials some prudent divines and learned experienced physicians might be joined. Now, if a person's a professional worshiper, getting people in touch with demons versus getting in touch with what the Christians are saying is the side of God, wouldn't it be just as prone to impostures to keep up the business? But hence, to conclude with Virius, who nevertheless doth acknowledge spirits, and the illusions and apparitions of devils, and the mischievous operations, as much as any, and tells us as strange things of them, and some others, that therefore there are no witches and sorcerers, is as if a man should deny the power of herbs, because 1,000 things have been written of them of old, and are yet daily falsely and superstitiously, and indeed it so fell out once in Rome, as by Pliny is recorded at large, where, when some ascribed such power unto herbs, as though sun and moon had been subject unto them, the dead might be raised, armies vanquished, and whatnot. Yeah, that's one of the things that messes up both the symbolism and the physical differences of what they can do when people take the herbs and the stones as deities, right? Which is not very well relished by many. At last came Asclepiades, who persuaded men that were very well disposed to be persuaded that all physical use of herbs and simples was a mere cheat, that men were better wont them, that there being other means, easier and less troublesome, to restore health and overcome diseases, which he professed to teach, and prevailed so far, for a while, that they were laid aside, and a new course of physic introduced, which for a while, as I said, so prone are men commonly to entertain new devices, gave good content generally. It is well observed by Aristotle, and I think a great part of human wisdom dependeth on it, that in all things of the world that are commendable, as there is somewhat which is true and real, so somewhat also which is counterfeit and false, there is beauty natural, saith he, and there is artificial beauty by painting and trimming. A true found healthy complexion, and that which makes a good show, but is not found, true real gold and silver, but diverse things also, that may be taken for gold and silver at a distance, or by them that judge at the outward appearance. So true found ratio succession, and that which seems so to the unlearned are to corrupt judgments, though it be very false. They that consider well of this may the sooner come to the knowledge of truth in all things. Well, we go on. There was an Aix Aqua Sextia anciently, now Aquensis Civitas in Provence, a county of France, so called, in the year of the Lord, well, or so they say, 1611. A Romish priest tried, convicted by sentence of the court or parliament, condemned to be burned alive for abominable practices and horrid things by him upon diverse some persons of quality committed with and by the devil. Now, if people have a different religion, I would strongly oppose the whole idea that, persecuting them for it. He had long desired and sought it. At last the devil appeared to him in the habit of a gentleman. The story is in diverse books, French and Latin, and translated at that time, I believe, in diverse languages. I would go 40 miles with all my heart to meet with that man that could tell me anything whereby I might but probably be induced to believe, or at least to suspect, that there might be some mistake in the particulars of his sentence. For my reason, I must confess, I was never more posed in anything that ever I read of that nature. Gathendus, indeed, in Parescius, his life, hath somewhat, as I remember, of Parescius his opinion, and if he thought some of those things he confessed might be ascribed unto imagination, but I see no reason given, neither are the things of that nature that commit any such suspicion. Besides Tristan, of the lives of the emperors and their coins, will tell you somewhat, which may make a doubt whether Gassendus ought to be believed in all things that he reporteth concerning that famous man. I am not very much satisfied of what religion, though truly a very learned man, Gassendus was, and by the way which is somewhat to the case of witches in general. If I be not mistaken, for I have it not at this time, there is a relation in that very book of somewhat that happened to Parescius, witches, when he was a child. That wicked sorcerer, which is burnt at Aix, foretold, before his death, that some misfortune would be done at the time and place of his execution, which happened accordingly, and very strangely too. Somewhat again, I must confess, I have seen printed, Mimica Diaboli, to take away the scandal of some part of his confession, are the devil's saying of Massa, etc., some part of which things might perchance with some color be ascribed to imagination, but that is not it that troubles me. But enough of him. What man is he that pretends to learning, that hath not heard, and doth not honor the memory of Joachimus Camerarius, that great light of Germany, so wise and for his wisdom, and other excellent parts, sought unto by many princes, so moderate a man, an excellent temper for the attaining of truth, and so versed in all kind of learning, that we shall scarce among all the learned of these latter times find another so generally accomplished. The strangest relations that I ever read are at least as strange as any I have read of witches and sorcerers and spirits. I have read in him, such as either upon his own knowledge doth he relate, or such as he believed true upon the testimony of others known unto him. The last work that he ever went about for the public was De Generibus Divinatium. But he did not live, the more the pity, to make an end of it, but so much as he had done was set out by one of his learned sons, Lipsia, 1576 of the Common Era. There in page 33 he has said the words, De spirituum vero, qua funt gracis dai mania, admirabili non folum efficacit fide manifesta specia qua fuds maa perhibentur praesentia incredibilis extant passim veterum narrations nostris temporibus super antia fidam comperta funt extra etiam it also de quibus postia dicator, so on page 89 again, and 151, and again more fully, but his strangest relations are in his proatmium to Plutarch's two treatises, De Defectu Oraculum and De Figura El Consecreta Delphis, set out by him with notes. Here I could come in with a whole cloud of witnesses, name hundreds of men of all nations and professions that have lived within this last 100 years, and not any among them but such as have had and have yet generally the reputation of honest, sober, learned, and judicious, who all have been of this opinion that we maintain, but because we have to do with them especially, who by their profession pretend to the knowledge of nature above other men, I will confine myself for further testimony to them that have been of that profession. I have been somewhat curious for one of my calling that had no other end but to attain some knowledge of nature, without which a man might quickly be led into manifold delusions and impostures. I have read some, looked into many. I do not remember I have met with any professed physician or naturalist, some one or two excepted, which have been or shall be named who made any question of these things. Sure I have met with diverse strange relations in sundry of them, of things that themselves were present at, and saw with their own eyes where they could have no end, that any man can probably suspect, but to acknowledge the truth, though with some disparagement to themselves, according to the judgment of many, in the free confession of their own ignorance and disability to give reasons and to penetrate into causes. Well, what then shall we say to such as Julius Caesar, Scaliger, Fernelius, Sennertus, the wonders and oracles of their times? As physicians to philosophers, men of that profound wisdom and experience, much improved in some of them by long life, as their writings show them to have been to this day. What shall we make of them, or what do they make of themselves, that will censure such men as either cheaters or ignorant idiots? Henricus Saxonia, a learned professor and practicer of physic in Padua, in that book he hath written of that horrible Polonian disease, which he calls plecum, which turns men's hairs in sight, the snakes and serpents. In that book he doth ascribe so much to the power of witches and sorcerers in causing diseases, not private only, but even public, as pestilences and the like, as himself confessed that he could never have believed until he was convicted by manifest experience, and indeed is wonderful, and may well be thought incredible unto most. It is maintained and asserted by Sennertus de Febribus, and in his 6th book, as I remember, de Morbis a Fascino, Incantation and Beneficiis Inductis. I forbear the names of many men of fame and credit, physicians too, because most of them are named, and commonly enough known, by Sennertus upon this occasion. There is one whom I think inferior to none, although perchance not so commonly known or read, that is Gorgias Racusaius, a Venetian who by his first education and profession was an astrologer, cast many nativities, and took upon him to prognosticate, but afterwards, conscious to himself of the vanity of the art, that is, when the devil doth not intermeddle, as always must be understood, for some astrologers have been magicians withal, and have done strange things, gave it over, and have written against it, very learnedly and solidly. Read him, if you please, in his chapters De Magis de Oraculis, yea, through his whole book, De Divination, and you may be satisfied with what he thought of these things. He also was a physician. Now, was it Divination? Instead of divination, because we don't yet. But I must not omit the learned author that set out Musaeum Viromense, a great naturalist and a physician too. He handles it at the end of that work, somewhat roundly and to the quick, I must confess, but very rationally and solidly, in my judgment, against those pretended petitions that would be thought to defend the opinion of Aristotle herein. I could say somewhat of ancient physicians too, and give some accounts of those many spells and charms that are in Trellianus in all his books. An ancient physician in high esteem with some eminent physicians of these late times, as they themselves have told me, though not for his charms, but for his other learning and excellent experience, which they had found good use of. But this I reserve for another place and work. And this mention of that eminent physician who commended Trellianus unto me puts me in mind of what he imparted himself, not long before his death, of his own knowledge and experience, and particularly of the account he gave me of the examination of a conjurer in Salisbury, which he said none were present but King James, of most blessed memory, the Duke of Buckingham, and himself. It is likely some others have heard of the same, and I had rather anybody should tell it than I, who was then a patient under him, and doest not, were I put to it, trust to my memory for every circumstance. Hereto I have gone by authorities rather than arguments, partly because I thought that the shortest and the clearest way for everybody's capacity, and partly because such arguments, if any besides these we have here, as have been used against this opinion, may be found fully answered in those I have cited. The truth is, it is a subject that the nature as doth not admit of many arguments, such especially as may pretend to subtly of reason, sight, sense, and experience, upon which most human knowledge is grounded. Generally approved and certain is our best argument, but before I give over, I will use one argument which perchance may prove of some force and validity, that is, a consideration of the strange shifts and evasions and notorious absurdities that these men are put to, who, not being able to deny the it looks like O and E with a flag in the middle. The Awa? Are, matter of fact, would seem to say, somewhat rather than acknowledge spirits and devils, and witchcraft, Pomponatius, who hath not heard of. I once had the book, I know not now what has become of it, but I remember well, I never was more weary of reading than when I read him. Nothing that ever I read or heard of legends and old women's tales did seem to me more groundless and incredible. But because those men bear themselves very much upon the power of imagination, which is indeed very great and doth produce strange effects, Howard Phillips Lovecraft is an important figure with that one. I shall commend to the sober reader that hath not yet met with him, though Aeneas he has learned tractate de veribus imaginationis, a very rational and philosophical discourse of their miserable shifts and evasions in general. The author are observator rather of Musaeum Veronense, before quoted, will give you a good account. I have at this present in my hands the writing of a physician, Augerius Ferrerius by name. What he was for a physician, I know not. All I doubt of that profession will not allow very well of his preface to Castigatio Castionis Practica Medicina, whatever they think of Castionis themselves. But in general, his style and various reading and knowledge of good authors speak him a learned man sufficiently. Thuanus, in his history, gives him a most ample elogium, and makes him to have been Julius Caesar, or I don't know, Jule.C. Scaliger, is intimate acquaintance, and much respected by him, but I doubt whether Thuanus had ever seen this book of his. It doth not appear by that elogium that he had. Well, this learned man in his chapter de Merica, so he calls it, Medication, where he treats of cures done by charms and spells, by words and characters, which others impute commonly to witchcraft. Well, symbols can be used for whatever side, really. First, for the Oa, yeah, that is like O and E with a flag in the middle. What in the world is, kind of, and then he doth not deny it. Nam iis qua fincibus exposita sunt contra bineri sani baminis non est. He thinks him little better than madmen that will deny that which is approved by so visible experience. Yet it seems he was one of them that did not believe or would not believe, though he doth not say so positively, spirits and witches and supernatural operations. What then? He plainly maintaineth and argueth it, although he quote no gospel for it, that such is the nature of the soul of man, if he know how to use it, that by a strong faith and confidence it may work any miracle without a miracle. Verum confidentia illa act firma pure suasio, that you may have some of his words, if you have not the book. Comparator in doctis animis per opinionem quam da characteribus e fecris verbis conceperunt doctis e rerum intelligentium habentibus nihil opus est externi, sed cognita vi animi per eam miracula edere possunt. And again, a little after, Doctus Vero e Phoebe Constans photo verbo sanibit. I do not hence conclude that this Ferrerius, though he speak as though he were, and names nobody else, that he was the first or only that hath been of this opinion. Avicenna, I forget how you say his name. I mean, that's how Westerners say it, but that's, you'd have trouble guessing what his name is in Arabic or something. But the Arab was the first, as I take it, that set it on foot. Some others had followed him in it, but since these men acknowledge the strange effects that others deny, let the sober reader judge whether of the two more likely to grant, spirits and devils, are to make the soul of every man, naturally either a god or devil. Well, if a devil is a being that has chosen to be that way, then, there's issue with that designation, right? But let men take heed how they attempt to do miracles by their strong faith and confidence, for that is the ready way to bring the devil unto them, that is it which they have made many witches and sorcerers. Well, John Dee prayed fervently and then had some experiences. So why criticizing him for don't be too into your religion, or the devil's gonna. It's like, if anything, that's how some people would have it prevented, right? As for that faith whereby men did work miracles in the primitive times spoken of in the gospel, commonly called the faith of miracles, that is quite another thing which I shall not need to speak of in this place, of a strong confidence in God, even in them that are not otherwise very godly, whether it may not, according to God's first order and appointment, produce sometimes strange effects. We have also had consideration elsewhere where we treat of the praetory enthusiasm, but this also is quite another thing, as may appear by what we have written of it. And it makes sense that he chose Dr. John Dee with this work, because John Dee thought church lacked the enthusiasm, it lacked the experience, and wanted to bring a more full engagement in the mythology at hand.